See? That was nothing. But that's how it always begins. Very small.
I was asked to talk about my experiences with the occult. Despite being very much a sceptic and an atheist, I didn't arrive at that position out of thin air. That's the result of many years of looking into ideas like psychic phenomena, religious miracles, occult magic, folklore, Satanism, demonology, mythology, anything you care to mention, right? Throughout, well, as long as I can remember, I've been interested in the occult, in the strange, in the mythological, in the cryptozoological, all of these things. And I spent a good chunk of, I guess, my teens taking that seriously and looking into it. I guess through into my early 20s, really wanting this stuff to be true. And while I've seen some stuff...
A minute, I'm a reasonable guy, but I've just experienced some very unreasonable things.
Unfortunately, the unreasonable things that I've seen are charlatans and fakery and rhetorical sleight of hand and so on. While I wanted all of this stuff to be true, I never found anything that was true. Plenty of fakes, plenty of scam artists and so on, many of the same people who would now be pushing the anti-vax movement or magnetic bracelets or crystal healing or whatever. Some of them move into more kind of pseudo-scientific circles like Deepak Chopra, but I never found anything that was true. And I looked into a lot of this stuff, and a lot of it is just so obviously made up for a rather specific reason that it becomes obvious. Yeah, people wanted to explain their night paralysis or their nocturnal emissions or nighttime orgasms or whatever in their sleep. So they invented the succubus and the incubus. Now, in some forms of that mythology, these are the same demon. The succubus would collect semen and then deliver it to a woman in the form of an incubus, and this would handily explain why the fishwife's new baby looks a lot like you when you're not married to her. That kind of thing. It's fairly obvious where a lot of this stuff comes from. Now, living in England, as I do, we're surrounded by Neolithic sites and old buildings, and mythology builds up over time. The sort of barn that belongs to the village shop that's just over the road, that's in the Doomsday Book, which is when the Normans invaded. They took basically a catalogue of everything in the country, and this is one of our main historical records. So that's getting on for probably about 1,000 years old, and that's literally 30 seconds walking distance. To the English, 100 miles is a long way. To the Americans, 100 years is a long time, as the saying goes. So we're surrounded by that. And then there's burial mounds, the Stonehenge, which is like 20-30 minutes up the road. Avebury, which isn't that far away either. I've been to pretty much every notable Neolithic site in southwest England at one point or another, and I've been to Callanish on the Isle of Lewis. So I've been to all these Neolithic sites and taken in. My grandfather used to know how to flint knap, and we would do that. There were, in Stone Age times, people were mining, digging pits for flint tools here, and there's a lot of mythology around all of that, both the original beliefs, the Celtic pantheons, and then the later ideas of the Druids and the romanticized versions of that the Victorians made up. There's Arthurian legend. We're surrounded by it. Even just folklore, local folklore, right? In this village, supposedly a phantom coach and horses was seen in what is now the school playing field. At one point, there's supposedly a grave. If you pass around it 7 times widdershins, that's anti-clockwise. If you pass around it 7 times widdershins, the devil is supposed to appear and take you away. We have one of only 3 black marble Tournai fonts there. The village church wasn't a church; it was like a way chapel back in the day. But it's got some kind of importance, because there's a knight buried there, which usually only happens on bigger churches. There's my grandmother collected a lot of local history stuff. I've got a ton of books on it. Let's see, local slang and so on. And one of the things about the village is that throughout the 18th and 19th century, people were curious why people lived so long here. Apparently there was a spike in people living, to 90 or 100 here, and they wanted to understand why. They thought there was some kind of longevity secret. What it probably comes down to is that the valley gives us a relatively clement microclimate. It was a farming village, so people had easy access to fresh food, and we had very clean water coming out of chalk aquifers and so on, and that chalk would have provided calcium, which would have helped prevent people having brittle bones and so on. This is the thing, though, right? There always seems to be something real, something material, or something venal that explains all this mythology. Psychics I never really had any luck with. We held seances as teens and kids, nothing. I've had things that other people might consider occult experiences, but because I wanted to know what was true, even though I wanted it to be true, because I applied skepticism even before I even necessarily knew what that was, these other explanations became kind of obvious. So one time we were holding a seance, and there was a sudden smash of a bottle in the other room, and everyone freaked out. I went and looked, and what probably happened was that the bottle, which was empty anyway, was on its side, and there was some holes in the kitchen wall. I don't know if they were remodelling or whatever, and a window open. So what probably happened was a draft gradually blew the bottle until it toppled and smashed. No reason to freak out. Perfectly good physical explanation. There's a site in the village called Lone Barn, and it is quite spooky up there. It's kind of on the top of the hill, but near some woods. It's kind of exposed. You can see a really long way. It feels quite bleak. And there were old sort of Celtic style drawings of horses and stuff drawn on the barn walls and elsewhere. Not the sort of thing you'd normally typically expect someone to put up there. And according to kids' scuttlebutt, there had been a suicide up there, and it was supposedly haunted. So I went up there. It is spooky. There's no getting away from the fact that it's spooky. It's hard to put your finger on quite why. And while I was up there was this weird keening howling sound, like someone in pain. Rather than freak out, I went to check it out, and it turned out what it was when the wind was just right. It was hitting the top of a bundle of scaffolding poles that were leant up against the side of the barn, and when it hit the lip of those poles just right, it made this eerie whistling noise across multiple tubes, so it sounded more like the modulation of a voice rather than a single whistling note, right? So it was slightly different. That's what that was. And so that's how it's been with everything that I've bothered to look into, everything that I've tried to check out, and it's just been one disappointment after another. I've read the Veda. I've read multiple versions of the Bible, looking for some truth in there. I've read the Quran, the most approved translations from Muslims. I've looked at all kinds of stuff. I've read the can never pronounce it, Kavalava, the Finnish myths that the Lord of the Rings was largely based on. I've read the Eddas. I've read so much mythology from all over the world. The stories of Anansi. I've read up on voodoo and so on. There's just nothing, right? You can understand that people are wanting to grasp the world or feel like they have some kind of influence or power when they don't. You know, asking for better crops or for someone to love them or whatever else. I've tried the magic. I've done the rituals. I've done the prayers. I've appealed to God. I've said the magic words to join Islam. Nothing. Revoked it. Nothing. Yeah, I've done all of these things, and just nothing. There's a challenge I regularly give to Christians. There's a passage in the Bible. If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, which is an analogy they use for the smallest thing ever in a lot of, well, we assume a lot of whatever literature survives from that period. So if you have even the tiniest amount of faith, according to the Bible, you are supposed to be able to ask for mountains to move, or in another version, which just shows the problem, a tree to move, and it'll be done. So I challenge people who claim to have faith to move my plum tree 1 meter closer to the house. It's still where it always has been. Whenever you subject any of these things to tests, they just fail utterly. Whenever you're remotely rigorous, and people come with various excuses for this, but it seems to me that the fact of the matter is that they just don't work. But I'm still fascinated and interested in the occult, in the mythological, in the religious, particularly the pre-Christian mythology and religions of Europe. And I think it's such a shame that the far right has co-opted so many of them, because they're fascinating, and there are indigenous culture, and there's traditions and ideas that need to be preserved there. And again, living in England, you often find syncretic traditions around blessing wells or the obios. Go and look that up. That have been kind of blended together with Christian mythology and given a nod and a wink. Maiden garlands, that's something fairly local as well. Oh, I missed the local folklore. Vernham Dean, which is a village just down the road. During the plague years, the local priest ordered everyone up the hill so they wouldn't infect anyone else, and he promised faithfully that he would bring them food and drink and so on every day. But then he got too afraid and he didn't. But they were so dutiful to their fellow villagers that they remained on the hill away from everyone else, and those who didn't die of the plague starved or died of thirst. And supposedly his penitent spirit walks up and down the hill, making up for all the times that he didn't go. Yeah, it's everywhere. You can't step 2 steps without finding something in Britain. It's just absolutely everywhere. But yeah, I'm still fascinated by these things. I still find them interesting, and I think there might be insights and ideas that we can take from all this. My kind of last gasp of flirting with the occult, of flirting with spirituality, whatever that means, was chaos magic, which is this idea that you kind of construct your own tradition with whatever works for you. Yeah, that appealed to my increasingly scientific and rationalist approach. If you do something and it works, why not reuse that? Why not redo that? And I was introduced to the idea via comics, Grant Morrison in particular, who regards his work, The Invisibles, as an occult work, even as much as it is about the occult and magic and culture jamming and all these other things. And it did spawn a kind of subculture of its own around an internet forum called Barbalith. And a lot of the people who've graduated from that, in essence, have become really kind of interesting and influential people in counterculture. And I hope I'm one of them. I don't have enough ego to suggest that. But the idea that you just use whatever works, that was appealing. So I find myself now, having decided that none of this is true, none of this is real, after years of exploration and study, I now find myself looking at, okay, even from a rationalist perspective, there is this desire in people for something strange, for something other, for something greater. If we ignore the supernaturalism, if we can defang the bad side of religion and mythology and occult practice and so on, what remains that can be useful? What remains that can be... I don't want to use the word true, because it's not true, and that's the kind of Petersonian approach, that there's some greater meta-truth level behind these things. He refuses to be pinned down on whether he actually believes or not, but there is this idea that he has that something can be untrue in the real sense while being true in a greater meta-level sense. But no, what I'm looking for is, what can we extract from these traditions, from this mythology, from this religion that is genuinely useful? For example, there's an idea in Chaos Magic, particularly in Grant Morrison's approach, this idea of the fiction suit, where you take on a made-up persona. Obviously, it's going to appeal to me as a role player, right? And then you kind of fake it till you make it. You act in that way, you dress in that way, you approach the world in the way of this character. And so you incorporate the positive elements of that character into you. King Mob is his self-insert into his comic book series, and he reported all kinds of strange, weird things happening to him as a result of that. But that's an example of a fiction suit. Well, we see that idea in heroes in Greek mythology. Be as strong as Hercules, be as cunning as, be as quick as, be as intelligent as. You see that in hero worship in a lot of mythology. And in Christianity, I mean, what would Jesus do is basically adopting a fiction suit. And fortunately, it's not the Jesus depicted in the Bible, otherwise you'd be an horrible cunt. But yeah, that's an idea that's useful. In alchemy, which became chemistry, but there were ideas in alchemy of purification, not only of the elements, not only of the materials in the world, but the purification and the idealization of the self. Become the best version of yourself. Be the best you can be. That kind of idea was in alchemy, and we see ideas elsewhere. Of particular interest to me is Norse mythology and its mirrors in other pantheons and so on that were influenced by it, particularly Odin, or Wotan, or Wednesday, whatever you want to call him, because he was willing to sacrifice everything for knowledge. And I've had a hard knock life in some cases, some ways, easier in others, but the idea that sacrifice can be worth it, that you can learn the deep magic that you can gain from it, that's a powerful, interesting and important thing. And his ravens are thought and memory. Remember what happened and ponder what is. That's an appealing and strong message to me, which I feel a connection to, even though I know none of it's true, right? You kind of fail to notice that I often put occult symbology and so on into my videos. This is the sigil of Lucifer, which is a symbol of liberation. As a libertine, as someone who believes in freedom, that's important to me. What else we got? Pentacles, the Eye of Horus, which is a ward versus evil. Odin's ravens there, another pentacle. And then we've got Baphomet, or the goat, or Satan, if you will, an Illuminati symbol, a Celtic knot wedding band, and a slightly Mexican-style skull. Okay, it drives conspiracy theorists crazy to have this imagery and so on in my videos, which it just tickles me. But there's something about all of these things that I find interesting, even if it's just trolling people, right? The Satanic Church, the Satanic Temple, is an interesting exercise in the kind of thing that I'm talking about, in that it's all theatre for them. They don't believe, they're atheists, but they use this shock value, this veneer, of religiosity, of spirituality, and they use it to troll, but they use it to troll for good. They use their powers for good, demanding that if the Ten Commandments are put outside a court, then from the spirit of religious equality, they should be able to put a statue of Baphomet outside, for example. And it just underlines the ridiculousness and the absurdity of religion in our modern secular society. But they're doing good, and even if they don't really believe, they're taking something from their theology, their ideas. I mean, Satanism's LaVeyan Satanism has been described as libertarianism for the soul. I think that's a fairly good description of it. It's rather selfish, but the concept of freedom itself can have some good come out of it. And embracing the theatricality and knowing it's not real or true, that has a power to it. And they're accomplishing good in the world in the way that I'm talking about. I would like to find the good aspects, the things that we can use, while at the same time defanging religion so that it no longer causes harm in the way that it has for thousands upon thousands of years. So yeah, that's kind of my occult experience. One disappointment after another, and maybe I just don't get it.
You are not brought upon this world to get it.
Zang.